Welcome to a very special episode of the Comic Book Wars podcast. I'm your host, Nico, the weekend update correspondent with comicbookspeculation.com. We are very excited to be here today with the Vice President of Gemstone Publishing, my friend, J.C. Vaughn. Jeff, would you please tell our audience a little bit about Gemstone and, of course, the most treasured publication in the comic book industry, the Overstreet Price Guide?
I grew up reading the Overstreet comic book price guide. First one I saw was number 6, which had that great Will Eisner Phantom cover. And pretty quickly thereafter saw the Joe Kubert Tarzan cover from number 5. And I think I bought or co-bought with my best friend, my first one at number 8. And it was always a big sacrifice because that meant that many more new comics I couldn't buy that week. And I somehow never got out of comics, and I had a career and started doing pretty well with that, and then decided, no, hey, I really need to do something in comics. I freelanced for Bob Overstreet. He sold the company Overstreet Publications to Steve Jeppy. Some of his folks didn't want to make the move from Tennessee. It created an opening for the associate editor position. We were doing a magazine called Overstreet's Fan back then. And I joined to do that. And here we are. And April 3rd will be 25 years later.
Wow. So this is the 50th year that the Overstreet Price Guide will be published.
It is.
You're super excited about that. And
I'm genuinely geeked out.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody couldn't be, and I'm super excited to talk to you about that. For those who got to hear a little bit about it, that's that cover.
That's number 8. That's number 8. That my best friend Rob and I bought that one and devoured it backwards and forwards. And as much as the listings were cool, the ads captivated me. Can
we talk a little bit about that? So, what year was that? Approximately, if you remember.
I don't know. Let's see, 8. That would be about 1978.
Okay, from 1978 until what do you think?
I joined
after we got rid of dial-up. That's how you bought comics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And really, there were always, not always, not in the beginning, but pretty much by that point and then on, there's some form of competing price guide. And they certainly weren't online. There were print publications. There were ones that actually Bob had to litigate against because they were just blatant copies. And quite frankly, some of the online ones started that way. I won't go into that, but
I couldn't imagine otherwise.
Yeah, and here's the thing: there are, in issues of timeliness, things that the modern market will move faster than us. This is absolutely the case when we're talking about print. How could it not be so? But in terms of its trustworthiness over the long haul, I'll give you the example of what we would miss. A variant cover that is really hot right now, and suddenly it's going for $60. Suddenly it's going for $100. And then by the time the book comes out, it's going for $20. Because the market settles back down. We miss the fluctuations of that by being print. But other than that, you take the average over the lifespan of the guide. It's been pretty darn accurate. Yeah.
So let's kind of talk about that. You just jumped head first into the pool. There are many who will suggest that Overstreet is somehow an anachronism of the past, that it can't keep up with the price fluctuations in the modern market, that it, everybody's a critic, it should be online. And the reality is every single year, the Overstreet Price Guide is purchased uniformly by the biggest and best dealers on the planet.
If you want the barometer of this, and there's much of what you said that there are grains of truth in, we should be online. We should have before now taken better steps to do that. But the fact is that the sales on the book, and you guys, I mean, if you look at the news, you hear what's happening to print media. They're not selling more and more and more. Yet each issue, we're climbing. We're not climbing by thousands, we're climbing by hundreds. But every year since number 40, we've gone up.
Yeah, I wonder if there's any other annual published book of any kind that has had consistent gross over the course of the last decade.
I don't know if there is or not. Niche publishing has been a sort of safe harbor. If you get people, and I'm going to throw out an example that I don't know if it's true or not, but as an example, like the Airline Pilots Association has its own magazine, and various other associations have their own magazines. Specialties in terms of employment have journals and things like that. And you see some other collectibles experiencing steadiness. We saw what happened when F&W Publications bought Krause, and it wasn't the fault of Krause or the publications, but rather the nature of the leveraged buyout of them, which there was just no way that they were ever going to generate the kind of money that they want. That was a cash grab and nothing else by the people who did it, not by the folks at Krause who did CBG and so many other fine publications.
Yeah, so I want to talk before we really get into comics and really start talking details about the market and the history of Overstreet generally, about some of the other publications that you guys do, because I find it to be fascinating. For example,
this was one of my favorite ones to give the green light to. I love movie posters. That Mickey and the Mad Doctor there on the cover I think it's like a 6-figure poster. I'm not good at movie poster prices. By and large, movie posters are super accessible. So you run out of wall space pretty quickly, but golly, there's just some great ones. That Black Cat there is super expensive, but I just like it because it's freaking cool. But I've held the Mickey and Mad Doctor one before.
No way.
Yeah. And the Bond poster on the cover there, I got Carolyn Monroe to sign mine when I was 13 and hung on my wall for quite a while. And Amanda Sheriff, who is our editor for our weekly email newsletter Scoop, is also writes a number of our books. And we only quote prices when we can document, and that's the part Bob played in that book. And then we just documented the heck out of movie poster artists and collectors, ways to take care of it, and things like that, framing and autographing, and just so many similar concerns that you would have in comics. So it's not an alien terrain to us. And of course, now that there's so many comic book movies, it's sort of even more fun that way.
I mean, it's just fascinating. CGC is grading movie posters.
Yeah, and lobby cards too, sure.
Lobby cards as well. It's an emerging market, and a lot of that stuff's pretty stinking reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, literally, you can get, you talk tens and hundreds of dollars. And it's not that there aren't 5 and 6 figure comics and 4-figure comics. Movie posters, sorry. It's just that they are much more, even some of the really great ones are really accessible.
Yeah. And one of the things I noticed is that there are lots of folks in Hollywood that are paying 5-6 figures for these, incredibly rare movie posters. And the only time I ever hear about them is in stories from the LA newspapers about an insurance claim or a house fire, or it's
sure.
It's just breathtaking.
Sure. When we had Jeppy's Entertainment Museum, we had this 1/6 sheet that was from a African American film. From the early days of film. The film itself didn't even exist anymore.
Wow.
and it was an incredibly cool poster, and it's I believe that's part of the Steve's Jeppy's collection that went to the Library of Congress.
Oh my! All right, without getting bogged down.
Yeah, man.
Your baby.
I love that one. That was the first of our how-to books, and we basically just wanted to go through and talk about the fun of collecting, the different ways to collect, collecting by character, collecting by dead universe, collecting by creator. We drilled down on Atlas Seaboard, which is one of my personal passions. The Atlas comics from the 1970s, and lasted a year and a half at most, and had a blast. And it was my first opportunity to work with Joe Jusko, who was a big Overstreet fan.
Wow! Now, tell me, is that the cover art was from a Marvel Masterworks?
Yes, it was. It absolutely was, and I was gaga over it. And I like Joe, am a big fan of classic Marvel, and I thought that, considering that he is best known as a fan of Big John Buscema, I thought he captured the fluidity of John Romita Sr. Amazingly well, and and there's something just grabbed me about that the first time I saw it on the Masterworks.
Yeah, you and me both. I mean, it takes my breath away.
This one is really special to me. Again, Amanda Sheriff, who is my editor at Scoop. The best thing I can tell you about this book is we were taking what we learned doing each of the movie poster book and comics and things like that, and said, how else can we use the same material to do a specialty focused book? And so Amanda called me up, and we were actually on Skype. She lives in Central PA, and I'm in New York, and she's pitching the book, and I just said, just stop, shut up, we'll do the book. And because it was such a brilliant pitch, and it really was. It's a ton of fun, and if you like horror, it's got a little bit of everything in it.
Horror's having a renaissance in comics all of a sudden. I mean,
it does seem like that. I mean, I know we go through phases cyclically, but it does seem like we're in a really good spot for that right now.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
And as much as I'm a superhero fan, what I tend to write personally in my comics, it really tends to be horror.
Yeah, that's super cool. I was shocked. I didn't even know about this.
That is Carrie Wood, who's the last of the listed authors there, is our assistant editor, and she is a cosplayer, and she really spearheaded this project. We took photos at a bunch of conventions. We went around for basically a year taking photos, and we did all sorts of things like what do you have to have in your emergency kit to repair your costume? Advocated for cosplay is not consent. Other things along that line. Really had a lot of fun capturing some of the images, and some of the folks we got to meet in the process were just really terrific.
Yeah, there's a lot of animosity towards cosplayers with with many comic collectors.
Yeah, and I think it's really misguided. I don't mean to lump more pressure onto the comic convention promoters, because goodness knows they have their hands full. But the truth is that if they get volunteers, it's probably volunteers because it's Comic Cons, but if they get people to control traffic flow and not let people stop in the middle of aisles, and I'm sorry, but I really think that's on the promoters. If you're a fan and you see somebody walking by with a great costume, you want to stop them and get your photo with them, or take their photo, or whatever like that. And that the excitement of that is nothing but good for Comic Cons. And people getting upset about that, it's just so parochial and short-sighted. But when they're stopping in front of your booth and they're blocking you from being able to sell things to people, and you've paid for that space, that's pretty freaking understandable that you're going to be upset. So again, I think that goes back to the Comic-Con promoters having to have traffic cops, which is not something we had to think about 15 years ago.
No.
But
I could have imagined we'd get crowds.
Yeah. but here we are, and
what a great problem to have.
I think it is. I think it is a wonderful problem to have, not a bad one. And the fact is, I've heard many times the people, retailers who are, like I said, I totally understand why they're hacked off. When you're doing this in front of their booth and people can't get in and buy their comics, and they have maybe a 48 or 72 hour window to sell their comics at that particular show. It's not even that long, because it's not 24 hours a day. But I totally understand their frustration. But again, I think it goes back to, yes, cosplayers should have some common sense. Hey, why don't we move over there? Fans equally should say, hey, I don't want to block this guy, but I'd really like to get your photo. But I hear some guys
don't sexually assault a cosplayer. Also,
I also hear this. I also hear people saying cosplayers don't buy anything. And I'm sorry, they've spent in many cases hundreds of dollars on these costumes. They're not in the same. Many of them are not in the same costume the whole show. Maybe they're only in it one day. They're going around and they're fans, and they didn't get to be cosplayers by not being fans. I think that it's letting our frustrations get the better of us. And listen, when I'm trying to walk through a convention, somebody just stops in front of me because they're trying to wait till everybody's lined up to get a photo. Yeah, sorry, I'm just walking through.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I get the frustration. Yeah. It's not holier than thou by any means.
Right. Yeah. No, you and me both. I mean, the thing is, I get it and so forth, but I like an inclusive community. And similarly, the same people that cry about cosplayers who sometimes, much like comic collectors and Magic the Gathering players, could work on their personal hygiene. I mean, Jesus.
I gotta say one thing about that. I went to a major antiquing. I went to a major antiquing convention. Okay.
Same deal.
We should not be thinking that we're the only ones that are hygienically challenged.
Oh Lord, I don't even understand it. But much like all this stuff, common sense. It also, these are the same people that throw fits about that, or the same people that are saying, "Oh no, you got to pay attention to what people are dressing up as at these conventions, because that's the direction of the market. That's really a way to kind of gauge what characters are standouts and stars."
Well, let's face it. The Harley Quinn bubble. They were absolutely the leading indicator there.
Spider-Gwen. I mean,
oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely.
And there'll be more.
Yeah.
Tell me about. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now let's talk about that book.
Yeah, tell me about this one. I hate to rush you through these, but there's just so much.
There is a lot. We were talking to the folks at CGC and Heritage, and our sister company, Hakes Auctions. And they really had been talking about the market for concert posters evolving. And we had a chance to up our expertise on this. And again, Amanda jumped in and
she leads.
Basically taught herself this. She does have an inroad. Her husband works at Hakes. But she's a movie poster collector, so the terminology was not alien to her. She asked good questions about the different printings and stuff like that, because that is the thing with concert posters. There's multiple printings of some of these things, but it's some fantastic art, great bits of pop culture history. Some of it's significant, some of it just cool, and again, an area that is wildly accessible. And like I said, CGC's in there because they're certifying them now. Another Just Go piece. The other one I fell in love with besides the Spidey. Not like there's not something to love about most of Joe's art, right? But
now, where's this one from?
For the life of me, I can't remember if it's a trading card or was a commission he did for somebody, but he showed it to me.
The background is new. It's the surfer on the board, and I can't remember where the heck the original one is from.
No, and I could ask him, he'd tell me right away, and I just don't remember. But this was gorgeous. Fun. This was fun because nobody had really done a book on how do you evaluate a piece of art, and it was right as the art market was really beginning to explode, which it has sort of continued to do
It's
unabated.
different in just a short amount of time that I like took a break from comics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just completely different for how you acquire OA.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
there used to just be, there were very few like third parties that were brokering deals. It was mostly
You go to a show.
and
Go to a
a lot
show.
of times,
There's an artist. Go to a show. There's an artist there, and he's got a stack of pages.
right?
Yeah.
Or I was talking to his spouse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, man.
Over,
Absolutely.
over the phone or over the internet, and she'd tell me what was available, and I mean, it was just like in just a short amount of time.
Oh, yeah.
And I credit the Charlie Adler and The Walking Dead with a lot of that, because I think that was when there was like so much new money coming in.
I think that there's. I think that we can look at a number of things. One, it's America. We respect success collectively, whether you like this or not, whether you think, hey, it's not artistically pure, whatever. It is. Why are we in the newspapers when a comic book sells for 5 and 6 figures or 7 figures? Because people know who our characters are now, which goes to the movies and TV shows. The social acceptance of what we do, comics, comic art, comic characters, has never been higher. It's, for those of us that are my age, and I'm in my 50s, it's still almost unimaginable that the thing that made you a minority in the extreme when you were in junior high school is now the thing that your nephews come to you for because you're cool. And I may be speaking from personal experience there.
No, we won the Revenge of the Nerds. Who'd have guessed?
It is amazing. When my better half needs to bribe her IT people, I send comics. And it really is something. But this book was a great opportunity to sort of codify without saying, hey, you have to like this character, or hey, this artist is all important, which is not what we want to do. We want to teach people to evaluate on their own. And it's one of the shortest of the books, because people have tried over the years to do price guides on original art, and I just think it's crazy. Because let's take a really great example. Let's say Fantastic Four #5. If you have page 5 and it's sold, and you can document what it sold for, and you have page 7 and you can document what it sold for, you have no indication of what page 6 is going to sell for. I mean, and that's just one issue. Can you imagine that on a whole run for any of these comics that have lasted hundreds of issues? So learning how to evaluate art is the only thing you can do, other than keeping up with the current market, educating yourself about awareness, building relationships, all that kind of stuff. And that's what we address in this book.
Pretty cool.
This one was fun. Carrie Wood and Amanda Sheriff both worked on this together, and of course Bob priced the comics. And it is our first character-specific book. And unlike the other ones where we've been talking about the how-to books, this is a price guide. In the other books, we would talk about prices, but we wouldn't fixate on them. We'd much more how-to. This is. We did do some how-to stuff in here. We talked to some Batman collectors about their passion, and it was a fun book, and it's something I would like to do more of in the future. And I think we will be able to do that. There's some great character stuff that's out there. We've reached the point where some of the great DC characters are 80 years old. Great Marvel characters will start getting there this year, next year, and next year's 80 years for Cap, and so there's some stuff there. And then of course we're 60 years since Marvel, so it could be there's a ton of great characters and so many collectibles. that maybe we'll go that direction. We'll see how. We'll see. This appears to be doing pretty well. It's not something that we expected to go great guns right away, but it is one of those books that is strong enough that if people actually look at it, they're going to buy it. It's a really nice book.
Yeah, wait till the movie comes.
Oh yeah. And Star Wars was funny. I was having some computer problems, and I was sitting at the Microsoft store, and our sister company, Hakes Auctions, and just price guide ethics wise, I don't have anything to do with their auctions. I'll consult with them on like why a particular comic is of note, that kind of stuff like that. But I am aware that when they get material in, they do excellent photography of it. Mm. So I was thinking about it. Amanda and I had talked about it, and I'm sitting at the Microsoft store as they're working on my computer, and I get a text from Steve Jeppy and says, "Why don't we do a Star Wars book?" Because Hakes had landed this major Star Wars collection. Of course, they ended up setting all sorts of records with it for Star Wars action figures, and I was like, "Well, I've got the photos." And so he literally texted me, and I was like, "Yeah, we're already talking about it." He goes, "Well, go ahead." I'm like, "Okay."
I mean, I feel like if I sat down and tried to learn about Star Wars, if I spent an hour or two a week for the rest of my life, there would be more for me to learn about. It's just such a rich,
it is
subculture. Well, more so than anything I can think of, really.
You know, one of the funny things for me is that I can get angry about the prequels. I can get angry about episodes 7, 8, and 9. I can rag on and stuff like this, but the fact is, I'm a writer because of Star Wars. I saw Star Wars the first week it was out. Wow. Our neighbor took all the kids to the first multiplex in Pittsburgh, and it was the Saturday after it came out, and it wasn't like I wanted to write that kind of stuff. I just knew. I mean, walk out the doors into the bright daylight, the clouds part, the rays shine down, the angels sing, oh, and I'm going to be a writer, and I just knew it. And there's something about people that have been motivated by this that have then turned it by itself into an industry. And Marvel played such a role in that, and it's forgotten now, but so did Starlog magazine, because issue 7 just was loaded with stuff about this. And then Star Wars #1 came out, I think, 2 months before the movie. And so we were really primed, and you know it's really great. You got to look at 20th Century Fox, and like they if you see one of the early posters, which is both in this book and in the movie poster book, it says "From the maker of American Graffiti," like that has any bearing on Star Wars, right? But it was his hit movie. They weren't going to say from the maker of THX 1138. So it was really outstanding to work on that. And can I digress for a second about Star Wars?
Please, yeah.
All right. Have you seen The Mandalorian?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. And episode 5, my friend Ming-Na Wen plays an assassin in that one. And, you know, she's from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and she was the voice of Mulan, and she was on ER and did all this. She's had a very great, successful, wonderful career, and she is a terrific person. But she wouldn't see Star Wars when it came out because she was such a Trekkie. She thought it would be disloyal. And keep in mind that over the course of the next year, and it was at first run theaters for 18 months.
Oh my goodness.
Okay. So we browbeat her. Like, how can you not see it? I saw it 18 times during its original release at the theaters, 18 times. And so finally the day it's out, a year, she breaks down and goes to see it and sits through it 3 times. Becomes this big collector and all this kind of stuff like that.
Oh my goodness.
And so for me, the minute she was on Mandalorian, I just couldn't stop laughing because I was like,
That's great. That's great. Yeah, Star Wars changed everything.
So it has, and like I said, I mean, obviously, if you just look at the book cover here, you've got action figures, you've got comic books, you've got play sets, you've got stuff that's based on the cartoons, you've got movie posters and more, and that's proverbial tip of the proverbial iceberg with all the Star Wars stuff that's out there. And each niche of this is probably one of the most attractive as a marketing person. If you can afford to buy the Star Wars license to do your pencil erasers or whatever, it's why wouldn't you? There are those of us that are just going to buy it because it says Star Wars on it.
Captured generations. It's strange that I'm now old enough that there are people whose Star Wars was the Phantom Menace 1, 2, 3, whatever.
Sure.
That there are now people who are their Star Wars is Kylo Ren, and I'm just like,
I only have one question. It's just like, how have there not been more memes of Kylo Ren and Stimpy? I just don't understand. I just don't understand how that hasn't happened. But yeah, I know exactly what
generational divides.
My nephew's 12. And I was in Los Angeles with my writing partner, and I got a call from the missus, and she said, "Hey, he wants to watch The Phantom Menace." I said, "No, he doesn't. He wants to watch Scene 39," because he was like 4 at this time. And what is she says, "What's Scene 39?" I said, "It's a lightsaber fight between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul." And she says, "How do you know that?" I says, "What do you think he does after school? He watches that scene."
Wow.
And so for him, we were just having this discussion at New Year's dinner. On New Year's Eve, we were having dinner, and we were talking, and I was sort of trying to make the point that whatever he likes is what he likes. I can tell him it's a bad movie, but that shouldn't interfere with whether he thinks it's a good movie or not, because I like Tango and Cash, and I don't think we can say that's a good movie. And
me too. It must be a generational thing.
But he, he liked the Star Wars films he likes. And I told him, yeah, when you're older, you're going to think something else. Like you're going to appreciate Rogue One when you're older, because it's a really well-made movie that look at the Disney people. The Disney people are unhappy because it didn't drive toy sales or create a theme park ride. It only made like $400 million. But at any rate, Star Wars, again, when we were talking before the show, I mentioned that there's a topic or two that we could do entire shows on. This is one.
Speaking of which,
yeah.
Let's move along.
Yes.
Holy cow.
We'll do the lightning round now. Carrie, my assistant editor, is not only a cosplayer, she's a gamer. And she is.
You do any of this stuff?
You know what? I did stuff like diplomacy and war games and stuff like that. But no,
when I was a kid, I remember the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle role-playing game I played when I was like very young. That was about as far as I ever waded into that water.
We did Traveler, which was science fiction. We did James Bond. We did Champions, which was a superhero one. Yeah, a little bit of D&D at the end of high school. It wasn't really my thing, but just because it's not my thing doesn't mean that a lot of people aren't doing it.
Enormous market. I've got friends who, they watch the movies. I like comic books, and then they're serious about tabletop gaming, and I'm just like, really? You don't know it about them.
And Carrie did a great job of that part. Carrie did a great job of pulling that all together, and really just sort of tip of the iceberg. With most of the how-to books, we take a little bit longer term approach. Obviously, on the price guide, we go year to year because the next one's coming. On the how-to books, we got a couple years to sell each of them, And we're coming up to a point where I'd like to evaluate that and see if we can do another volume in that, because there's so much material.
Now this one was I didn't know you did it.
What's funny about this one?
Boy, you guys ahead of the curve. Holy cow!
Yeah, we actually really were, and that's because Carrie and Amanda both were saying that this might be an interesting area to do. Carrie is the one with the real expertise in the area.
Watch out! I hope she made some money. Holy cow!
But the interesting thing to me was the reason I greenlit the book was Amanda went to like a little, not even a state fair, like a county fair in around York, Pennsylvania, and there was a guy with a booth selling video games for $400, $1,000. And I'm like, well, I knew it had been going on. I knew the consoles had begun to bring money, but I really wasn't clued in that it had gotten down to that grassroots level.
Oh my goodness! And I think, was there a six-figure sale this year?
Yeah, there was. You know what? Truthfully, I'm not gonna quote anything there because I'd be wrong. But it's been some amazing things, and obviously Heritage and WATA Games, which is the people certifying them, have really pushed that. I think we've seen Certified Link and some other people putting in auctions for them as well. And I think that'll continue. I know some people who have sold comic art to go buy video games because they believe that they're going to make some money.
There's smart money investing in video games. Frankly, I'm not doing it. But the people that are, they are not what I would call inexperienced or anything other than shrewd collectors of nostalgia. And like you said, they're selling OA, Golden Age books. I mean, big books. And then going in and buying video games, graded, ungraded, sealed, truckload. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Didn't see that one coming.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's not, I guess I feel because I'm sort of dispassionate about it, I'm a more clinical observer in this case, unlike comics, which, I drank the Kool-Aid a gazillion years ago. I can look at this more analytically and go, yeah, I get what they're doing.
Yeah, I get it. I'm just, I don't know if I got the cojones to do what others are doing. That's for real. So these were two of the coolest pictures you sent me. Tell me about what
the white one is. The first printing.
Oh my goodness!
And there was 1,000 copies of that made. And the blue one was the second printing, and there's 800 copies of that originally made. There are, interestingly, I only just discovered this year, or late last year, as we were working on the facsimile edition of #1, which will come out in April.
I know.
And yeah, we've got April 8th. We had announced April 1st, but we're having to change that because we needed one more week for the printer because we're doing a signed edition.
You took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah, and obviously, Bob actually drew that cover, and that's another thing I just learned. That those were not stats. He actually had to draw each of those logos.
Oh my goodness, that's neat.
And one of the great things about this for me is if you look at the top of the guide in that book, Action Comics #1, $300 in mint, $275 for Detective Comics 27.
Oh my goodness.
And so Bob did that. He had been working with a lot of people to try and get a price guide done. Bob was a coin collector from childhood and a comic collector as well. Quite frankly, there's a reason the EC logo is on there, is because Bob was an EC fanatic. And
I knew I liked it.
Somebody would have done a price guide if not for the EC comics, but it wouldn't have been Bob without them. And he, as a coin collector, knew that they had the annual book coming out in that market, and he thought they needed one in comics. And he talked to Jerry Bales, and he talked to a lot of the other collectors in the early days, started documenting things, and he was coming up with, what the grades might look like and all that kind of stuff. But the funny part was he was still hoping somebody else was going to do it. And then comic prices had gone crazy, and they sort of stabilized to the point where he thought, well, we could put out a book now. And even though he started almost immediately working on the next edition, he was sort of hoping he wouldn't have to. He thought one would take care of it. And, and those would be the prices. And little did he know that it was so successful that he'd go to the mailbox every day. There'd be a check for another copy of the guide. People would keep buying it. People rebelled because the prices were too high. And he, like I said, started working almost immediately on number 2. And people started sending in corrections and started sending in, hey, what about this? What about that? And you can look over the course of the first handful of guides and see the growth in the number of listings. It's amazing. And then, like I said, I see it around number 6, and then pretty quickly saw number 5 after that. Did we send you 6? Did we send you the Spirit cover? Because there's a really great story with this.
Oh, please hold on one second. Let me. You start talking, and I'll bring it up.
All right. Well, this was going to be the first one distributed in the bookstores. The book had, obviously a phenomenal growth.
For those who are not familiar, can you explain to them the importance of Will Eisner's character, the Spirit?
Yeah, Will Eisner's The Spirit appeared in newspapers in a comic-sized supplement that ran in newspapers that were called the Spirit sections. And Eisner, of course, goes on to do all this other stuff and is one of the great fathers of the American graphic novel. But he had just done a series of cookbook covers for the bookstore publisher, and they bombed. So naturally, they blamed the cover artist. Couldn't be the content, right? So Bob has to call Eisner, who is even before or parallel with A Contract with God, is universally regarded for his teaching, for his philosophy about comics, for his work ethic, everything else that you can imagine about Will Eisner. Everybody holds him in high esteem. So he has to call him on Christmas Eve and tell him, I can't put your name on the cover. That was the compromise. You can't use this cover. It's Will Eisner. And they're like, no, we're using this cover. We're not going to be able to get another one in time. Okay, but you can't put his name on it. Will, ever the consummate professional, always working to expand the boundaries of comics, is totally a professional and says, no problem. Don't worry about it. He was so gracious that Bob couldn't stand it. He put his name on it anyway. And it sold 100,000 copies.
Wow. Yeah, the greatest.
And that was the first bookstore edition of the guide.
Oh my goodness. Gosh, that's so neat. So
Will was one of the few people to not sell their original to Bob. There was a 1-of-1 litho of that created and given to Bob. And it hung in my office for like 10 years. And it was the first guide I ever saw.
Super cool. This is my my absolute favorite book that you guys started publishing of the non-price guides.
Yeah, you know what? It is also, aside from the price guide ourselves, it is the best and most consistent seller. It is a very useful book. We converted from a 100-point to the 10-point grading system rather contemporaneously with the origins of CGC. And I was real involved in the transition between the 100-point system. There was there weren't really a lot of flaws in it. There was just too much minutia in it. So we refined that with Bob's guidance, and then really just went through making sure, and editorially speaking, what my gig was, making sure that there was no place where we were trying to do apples and oranges. We wanted apples and apples comparisons. And we had a lot of back and forth doing it. We had a lot of input from the community. And I would say that if you are serious about learning grading, it's a really decent tool. There's nothing that's going to replace experience and practice and actually doing it. But in terms of teaching yourself grading or teaching somebody else grading, I think it's a great tool to this day. We're going to have we actually haven't even officially announced it yet, but we'll have a new edition fourth quarter this year.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that with me. I love the book. I want to talk, kind of repeat maybe a little bit of our conversation when we first met, our first conversation over the telephone about standardized grading,
Sure.
about the importance of standardized grading in the market, and if you can kind of talk about that and where you see it going, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. I think one of the things that we'll see, like many other things that can be quantified, it's not too hard to imagine, given the technology that we already see out there in other marketplaces, that grading will become more and more scientific, and therefore more and more calibrated and less artful. Right now, if you go in to have your knee replaced, it's not like having your knee replaced 20 years ago. They will look at your weight. They will tell you that if you do your exercises, your physical therapy, if you're overweight, if you're perfect weight, whatever, and they'll look at your age and they'll say, if you do your exercise, you will be better in this many days. Okay. Where 20 years ago, there's still more hit or miss there. So there's more art, and now there's less art, and there's more science. And I think that things may eventually go that way, but we're in the period where we are now, where we have people doing their best to be consistent, do their best to be grading specifically. And I think that it's really incumbent upon them, because they want the best for the long term in the business, because they want to be in business long term, is that their grades not favor either the dealer or the consumer, that the grades be what the grades are. It's a very hard road, because you got to understand, somebody walks in with what they think is a 9.6 and they get back and it's a 9.2, and financially there's some impact to that. And so they're going to scream and holler. And you know what? People can only be screamed and hollered at so long before it starts affecting them emotionally, and maybe they are hesitant to go lower. But truthfully, the benefit to all of us is that those guys are as accurate as they can be, and chips fall where they may.
I wonder how long, and I'm pretty confident I'm going to see it in my lifetime. It's going to be before it's a series of, however many pages there are in the comic, photographs on a phone, on an app, that are sent to a third-party vendor, where they give you an estimated grade for a fee of that specific book. Maybe a subscription service.
Well, yeah, I think you're right.
Day's coming.
I think one of the things about that is that photographically, we can't be too off from that, because the facial recognition software is so great. That really just comes down to what is the expense for that. What we will get into.
Yeah, the CIA could read a newspaper from space in Russia in the 80s.
I'm
pretty confident you'll be able to buy a box that you can put your book in. It'll turn the pages for you.
The difference is what will happen when it comes to, say, something like this. I don't know if you've seen anybody that really knows the Mile Highs, but I can tell you. I'm sure that. Listen, I haven't talked to anybody about CGC about this since Steve Borak was at CGC, but I'm sure that they've got people who can do it too. You got to figure Matt Nelson would absolutely know how to do this. But Steve Borak at CBCS, Steve Jeppy, Bob Overstreet, John Snyder Jr., other guys that I could name, but that I have seen pick up a book, smell, and say, it's a Mile High. And they're willing to stake their reputation on it. And because they know. That's the part that we can't replicate with a phone just yet. But it's eventually, it's all quantifiable. It's all science. You know, it's ones and zeros. They'll figure it out. Someday they will. And the funny thing will be is there anything that's been misrepresented as being what it's not in our generation that'll get exposed in that generation?
Wait for the trimming scandal.
Yeah, I think the trimming's the closest we've gotten to uncovering something like that, and that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, so you've got a little overlap, I guess, with coins simply by virtue of Bob Overstreet's prior relationship.
But his understanding of the coin market as a coin collector, and obviously the coin based origins of third-party independent grading in comics purely came out of the coin and currency world.
And we're seeing the same kind of things, right, in the baseball card community with trimming years ago, more recent scandals now. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to kind of hone in and talk about the other publications that Gemstone is doing, that that you're doing, the Overstreet Guide to horror movie posters, concert posters, is because I think there's so much to learn from these other disciplines about our market.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You want to talk about prices in movie posters? They have had disclosure of restoration almost the whole time, and people don't
treated like fine art.
And people don't think anything about buying something knowing it's restored because they know it's restored. What happened is, in our field, a lot of people tried to pass off restored as new. And some of the people who did the restoration, and let's give them a total pass on intention. Okay, let's not say they were doing it to screw over people. Let's just say they wanted the nicest looking possible comic. But some of them were not very professional in how they did it. And listen, I know that some of the people that did it weren't doing it for good intentions, but I don't want to go down that road, and we don't have enough time to do that anyway. But so to me, that's always been very intriguing as a guy who dabbles in posters. I've got a handful, but that's it.
I got a Star Wars original movie poster that I got to figure out what the hell to do with.
I've got I have a Revenge of the Jedi, one of the missed.
Nice.
Before
that's a neat one.
Yeah, I have that.
Yeah, will you tell people about that for those that don't know?
Well, they originally, the first title of Return of the Jedi was Revenge of the Jedi, and somebody went, "Hey, Mr. Lucas, vengeance is not the way of the Jedi." And like, oh no! And there are ones that there's two variations. One has a date and one doesn't, but they're just gorgeous. Oh. And it's one of the great Star Wars posters, really.
Absolutely.
And it's still fairly accessible. So
yeah. Oh, I think they're undervalued.
So
don't go buy all of them because I don't own one. You hear that? Stop it. Whatever you're thinking. But yeah, I think they're relatively undervalued. Super cool. And something that some people are hip to. All people used to be hip to, but our market has exploded in such a profound way in such a short amount of time.
We are. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really easy to say, with the success of the Marvel movies, particularly, that we have, that's sort of like, it's just so we are so culturally accessible. And let's face it, people get out there in the cold, cruel world and they're paying their student loans and they get their first gig where they're making some good money, and they're not getting trophies for showing up. They actually have to do work, and they want some little bit of comfort. Many people, the first impulse of collecting is nostalgia. Now, I don't think they stay in it for that. I really don't. But the first impulse is that stuff that makes you comfortable. When in the 90s, we had Love Boat action figures selling for hundreds of dollars. What is that except people who were in their late 20s suddenly had money and they're like, oh, I remember that.
The plane.
Yeah, that's it. Fantasy Island, man.
Holy cow.
So
Wow. Yeah, super neat. So where do you, I mean, I think we're kind of in a renaissance right now, right?
Yeah.
As far as, I mean, no question about it.
Yeah.
Where
And I
do
think
you
one of
see
the things,
us?
oh, yeah, well, here's what I think is going to happen. Uh, I think that Marvel through Disney Plus has a chance to reach people and tell them their story, the history of Marvel. If they get, and I don't know that they're going to follow up on that, I just know that they have a golden opportunity to do that. DC, through whatever app they settle on, whether it's part of Warner's or their own or whatever, will have the same kind of thing. If we culturally can tell people who have accepted our characters the story, I think it's going to be great.
Mm.
And then they'll learn that. I'll give you one more example. I know we got to wrap up, but I got one more example of this. I'm on the Long Island Railroad going into the New York Comic Con. I'm sitting on one side of the aisle. There's plenty of people on the other side of the aisle. And about 3 rows behind me, a couple in their 70s. About 8 rows ahead of them, Captain America. And the couple in their 70s were arguing over which Captain America it was. And I'm like, how can anybody tell me we didn't win?
Wow.
You know, so my job, your job, everybody who loves comics, it's our job to get the story to these people. Not only the characters are cool, how they came about is cool. The people who created them are cool. And they're human beings, so necessarily flawed individuals. They're not holier than thou. You know, we may exalt Stan. Some people try and tear him down. The rest of us build him up. But the truth is, just a human being with a phenomenal amount of talent. And so you got to figure there's a story there, right? Or 12,000 stories there. And if we can convey some of our excitement about, let's say, the source material for these movies and TV shows, we will have done a favor to all of the people who came before us, and gave us the information that you find packed in the Overstreet Guide for the 25 years before I started there.
Yeah. And as you so astutely observed when we spoke privately, it's our duty to get people reading comics, to put comics in the hands of kids, to encourage our friends to go and visit a comic shop, to pass out trade paperbacks, to make sure that the material gets passed on. That doesn't mean that we necessarily need, Bob in accounting, the guy up the hall from us in our office, to spend half of his paycheck on, some golden age book or silver age book.
Absolutely. When, why we don't want to jump to thinking about that when they can get a collected edition, a facsimile edition, or a trade paperback or whatever. Let them get excited about it. We just got to find the means of introducing them to it. I do think, and before we sign off here, I want to say we're doing the facsimile edition of Overstreet #1, and I'm really excited about it because I know that I have enjoyed giving my 12-year-old nephew the facsimile editions of New Mutants 98 for Deadpool, and he was just like, what? And he got the facsimile edition of Star Wars #1, and of course it's got the vintage ads in it, and he feels like it's a time machine.
Oh, super neat. Thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. I want to give you just a couple minutes to sort of let everybody know when they can expect the 50th anniversary.
Oh, sure.
To hit shelves. I know you guys are going to be at San Diego Comic Con. Tell me what you can.
Okay.
Whatever secrets you can reveal.
I will tell you, we have April 8th, we have the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide #1 facsimile edition. There's multiple versions, softcover, hardcover, signed and numbered. We have in sometime after that a companion book to the Price Guide that will come out before the Price Guide. Then for Price Guide 50, which is July 22nd, both the standard edition and the big oversized edition will come out July 22. We have been working on some of the stuff in conjunction with them for a couple of years. I sent in a cover sketch for approval on Tuesday. We're cutting this one really close, but it's going to be one of the coolest covers we have ever had. We have several others in the bag already, and then we're going to do some special stuff at Comic-Con in San Diego, and we will also have the grading guide, which I sort of teased earlier. We haven't officially announced, but why not say it? We'll have that in fourth quarter of this year, and then we may have some really cool stuff next year too. I had some conversations on Friday that were just amazing.
My friend Jeff, it has been a real treat. You are a treasure to the community that we love.
Thank you, sir.
You know, as a benefactor of the work that you do, am incredibly appreciative, as are all of our viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for joining us. It means the world to us, and I will look forward to talking to you soon.
Absolutely. I mean, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.